Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. I am joined today by MD Boncher, who is here for an interview on his Tales from the Dream Nebula series and some of the other stuff he does. MD, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the Dream Nebula?
Well, I'm MD Boncher. I've been writing since about 2016. Published my first work for my dark epic fantasy series, Akinawazi Saga, in 2017, and then republished it in 2019, and then the third book in that series in 2020. And last year, 2 years ago, I got the itch to do what I'm calling pulp punk. It's sort of a mashup of classic sci-fi pulp and with the modern punk sensibility, so nanopunk, cyberpunk, biopunk, all that kind of in a great big ball of good sci-fi goodness, and created Tales from the Dream Nebula series, which we did a rapid release last year of 3 novellas, and they're all out now. And so that's cooling off a little bit while I turn back towards Akinawazi Saga this year for moving forward. So yeah, I've been a writer for a few years, 6 novels out, and the 7th one is in the works, with also a novella that I did an adaptation of a classic play that surprisingly worked well in my Akinawazi Saga setting, and I'm hoping to edit that and do some edits to it so it then can be inspired by instead of directly derivative of, so I can publish it out there. So that's kind of what's in the works right now, are those 2 books, the next in the Akinawazi Saga, which will finish up a trilogy story arc, and then that novella that I'm hoping to put out there, hopefully as a free novella.
All right. So I'm not really familiar with your fantasy work, but I have to admit, I'm really curious about this. So let's start with, when I was reading Dream Nebula, I kept getting flashbacks to Flash Gordon, especially the 1980 movie. Is that intentional, or am I just okay?
Okay. This is literally how the whole Dream Nebula came about. I was sitting in my apartment doing laundry, folding it on the carpet while watching my copy of Flash Gordon on my TV, and Max von Sydow comes out, and he's just chewing up the scenery as he does. He is such a glorious Ming the Merciless. I find out decades later that he loved that character, and so he really sank it. He loved it. He hated wearing the 70-pound costume, but he loved doing that part. And I sat there and said, I miss Ming. Where is there some good Ming the Merciless, really menacing but somewhat incompetent kind of villain out there? Because you think about it, Ming is only competent when it's dramatically applicable. It's sort of like the Roger Rabbit of villainhood, Yeah, I can only escape when it's funny. Right. So when it's dramatic, he's suddenly really powerful. But otherwise, Flash gets away. Vulcan, moons him, and off they fly. Beg your pardon. So I'm sitting there going, I miss Ming. And then I'm sitting there watching I wanted a new Ming the Merciless. And it's like, well, why isn't anybody really doing this? But, me, I didn't do any of my research. I just assumed nobody was doing it. And I said, you know what? I want to see another Ming. So I'm going to write a story about another Ming. And then I went, oh crap, I need a hero then to go along with it. So I started thinking about that. And I love the 1980s Flash Gordon. I think that is a highly underrated film. For all the troubles that it went through to even get made, and then the post-production problems with the feud between Sam Jones and Dino De Laurentiis and his agents really screwing him over with manufacturing a fight for more money. I feel bad for the whole situation on all parties there. But I sat there looking at the absolutely whacked out of its mind art direction. It's beautiful. I mean, you sit there and see those Technicolor skies and all the crazy features, the shattered moons, and I was like, how do I do that as more of a hard science thing? I did figure it out. That's why I used it. But it took a little doing, and how it actually is done, it's going to be revealed, but that's several novellas down the way, because it's a big spoiler on to the sort of the whole nature of what the Dream Nebula is. because in the process, sorry to loop back around, when I was making my Ming the Merciless, Zhao the Eternal, the all-seeing eye, I hit on an idea because I knew what the Dream Nebula was going to be to make it hard science. But then I was kind of like, well, all right, how do I move these stakes around a little, and what is it that makes my evil emperor so much more cool? And then I had a few more that I'm not going to mention influences hit me, and I said, oh, that's how we can do it. So there's a huge mega spoiler that I can't tell, that I've only told 4 people about the true nature of Zhao the Eternal. One of them, when I told them, and this is a professional editor that I had a consultation with, she had to catch herself from falling out of her chair, literally. And that's when I'm like, yeah, I got something. I got something huge. I just have to get it there. But right. Of course, I then started trying to dissect. All right, I have this really cool villain, but a villain is only as good, excuse me, as his hero. And so I started going, all right, what's the kind of villain that you want to throw into this? Flash, I thought about it. He isn't a real everyman. He isn't. He is, if you think about it, he's an athlete. He's basically a trust fund kid with a Yale education, and he's celebrated in sports and feats of daring do. The 1980 movies sort of dumbs that down a little bit, but at the same time, he's still a heroic figure. On the other hand, I leaned more towards Buck Rogers in that I made him, I decided to make him more blue collar, the everyman hero. And though I took my inspiration not from sci-fi pulp, but from a Hal Needham film, Bandit Darville from Smokey and the Bandit.
I'm not familiar with that.
You're not familiar. Smokey and the Bandit. Okay, that's it. You got to go. It was Burt Reynolds, one of his big breakout. He'd already had some critical acclaim, but it's the movie that kind of made him the most famous because you got the black Trans Am and everything. And I said, all right, how about making him Bandit Darville? Well, he slowly shifted and became, the Snowman, Jerry Reed's character from the same film. And so I made myself a sky trucker, guy that wasn't concerned about the nobility or anything like that. I wanted to take the Flash Gordon style Mongo universe and flesh it out to what would happen if Ming had conquered Earth, and what would happen with the remnants of humanity and how would it grow from there. Because the only thing that always really bothered me with a lot of these sci-fi pulps is it's very insular, or not insular, it's very limited in the social contact that you have. Everybody's either shoved down into peasantry, which nobody cares about unless the story needs it, but otherwise it sticks within this small incestuous group of nobility and people of high power, because people want to see that kind of stuff, that they want to follow the jet set more than the common man. But if you don't have that nice grounded common man, you really can't have a believable society unless you're just sort of glossing it over to follow the action. But you can't really develop, much richness to it. As far as I'm concerned, it's like, how dark do you make your roux for your gumbo? And anybody worth their salt in Southern cooking knows darker roux is usually a better roux. But that's sort of where I went with. So I populated the world and said, all right, where are the common people in this? This is where I'm going to start my hero. This is where Winston Harper, my down on his luck by self-inflicted wounds, Sky Trucker, will start, and he is going to get pulled into this whole big game of power and this is only a spoiler in as much as it's revealed in the first book, that Zhao notices him getting entangled in this and decides to see about manufacturing a hero of the people. And so from the very start, and like I said, this is only a spoiler in as much as it's I lay it out up front, is Zhao knows. But then again, I call him the all-seeing eye for a very good reason. So, right. But there's a lot of mystery to go along with that too. And so anyway, I leave that for the reader to kind of ferret out. But yeah, that one's not too terrible of a spoiler to give out. Is Zhao knows, and he is watching the exploits of Winston as he is dragged into this struggle of rebellion against Zhao himself.
Right. And the interesting the interesting thing about that kind of a conflict isn't so much that, that it's happening, but can Zhao get away with it, right?
Yeah.
That's really what the audience is going to be on the edge of their seat about.
Yep.
So
can Winston survive what Zhao concocts, or will Zhao help him? Will Zhao hinder him? There's that whole little. It's in a way, it is Hitchcockian definition of suspense. The definition of Hitchcock gave was you can show a picture of two people having dinner, but if you show the picture of the bomb under the table with the ticking timer, the suspense is, will they get away before it explodes? And so that's sort of the whole point of why I give that away for Zhao knows what's going on with Winston. The question is, does he maintain observation? Is he able to see everything or only some things? But then, of course, Winston still has to survive everything that's chucked at him. And as you notice in the Waking Nightmares, it's not a small feat to survive. Oh,
sorry,
that's all right. Just throwing stuff around.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess you've already answered the question of whether Winston was inspired by Big Trouble in Little China, which was my initial assumption when he turned out to be a trucker.
There's a little bit of him. I mean, Jack Burton does. I love that movie. I absolutely adore it. And the funny part is that Jack Burton in that movie is the sidekick. When you watch it, Wang is the hero. Straight up. And Jack Burton is the semi-incompetent sidekick that has his moment in the sun towards the end.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the fun things about that movie. Also, there's some great scenery chewing bad guys in it too.
Oh, David Lopan by James Hong, one of my favorite actors. That guy can do almost no wrong. I love him in Balls of Fury, for crying out loud. He does great. I love the fact that in Kung Fu Panda, James Hong talks about how his father and his family owned a Chinese restaurant. So all that stuff about the noodle, we had noodle folk, that comes from a true place from him. Same goes with his appearances in Seinfeld, where he plays that, and Big Bang Theory, where he shows up as a maitre d'.
Interesting. I didn't know that about him. Yeah, yep. I've watched a lot of these movies, but I don't know a whole lot about the production or the actors. That's not
I love that kind of stuff
as much. So
I'm the kind of guy that'll watch the specials or the audio tracks of the analysis. Like two of my favorite ones for sort of the audio, the talking track with the actors or whatever, is actually done by two film critics. The first one is, believe it or not, Roger Ebert does the critics soundtrack, or the critics track for Dark City. And it is a masterclass in film theory and study. I actually came away from that movie respecting Roger Ebert so much more, just because of the quality of the mind that he applied to it, without getting into Kubrick fanboy film student that nothing is as good as any what the heck is that now? I'm so blanking. The one he did based off of the Dutch painters. You know what I'm talking about? Sort of the Renaissance era. Bollocks, I can't remember. Anyway, but yeah, those kind of film students, but he picks it apart and deals with the craft as well as the known attempts of what the directors and whatnot were doing. And then the other one was the critics track from Emperor of the North Pole, which is a Lee Marvin. He won an Oscar for Marty. It was in Ernest Borgnine, who's and Keith Carradine. Wonderful film, but the critics track on that is amazing what it pulls out. I didn't know so much about the director and how that movie was made, let alone its craft going into it. It is astonishing stuff, but I like that kind because it teaches me more about writing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, pretty much any creative field, you can there's a lot of lessons you can cross-pollinate to other creative fields. So speaking of writing, I guess the big question for a lot of people is whether you're a planner or a pantser. So do you have a preference?
I am a binging plantser. That's what I call. I will get a rough outline in my head, generally speaking. I often do not write it down, but I try to come to a place of understanding of my characters and my setting, and then I tend to binge write. I can sometimes do a 4,000 word day. My record is like 10,000 and change in a single in a single day. Yeah, that was a 12-hour day, mind you, but I got 4 chapters done that day, and at the end, my brain just sort of felt like it just came out of the microwave. It was one baked potato. And then I'll write until I basically can't write anymore, because I always like to go back to the movie The Matrix Reloaded, and the scene where Neo meets the Oracle, and she's kind of explaining kind of who she is and what's going on to a certain extent, and she's like, you've already made the choice. Your point, you're now just trying to understand the choice. And that's sort of how I am with my writing. I already kind of know what I need to do, but I have to understand it before I can put it to paper and make it stick. And that sometimes leads to some really frustrating writer's block. But like I said, I'm a binging planter. Once I understand, goosh, out it comes again in a big rush. So
right. Yeah. And one thing I have to really compliment you on, and I know I've said this to you before, but I really do feel like you have an understanding of your characters when you write them, and you give the audience an understanding of your characters as they're reading about them that you don't get from a lot of fiction. It was really impressive to me, because I could tell I wasn't seeing everything about a character, because I've only read one of your books so far. I do plan to get through some more, but I could tell I was seeing one part of a character whose arc clearly had logical extensions beyond the story I was reading in both directions, right? Like, so I knew that if I went back, I was going to see the same character making the decisions that led me up to this point. And then as the story goes forward, I could tell what I'm getting here is going to continue to inform this character. This is not, Seinfeld, to use one example. The things we see about the characters in this book are not going to be dropped in the next one, right?
Right, because this is a larger story arc.
Yeah, and what's really impressive is that, like, there are stories that do that, but it almost feels like you're not going to get that. A great example that I don't know if you've read any of them, but the novels based on the Monk TV show, there is character progression in those books, but it always feels like it just comes around the corner out of left field, and it's really hard to go back and read through the series and assemble them, even though it does build on itself and it's consistent. It's more of like a comfort food kind of a story where your characters just, they're adding a little salt to the recipe or something like that. I think that level of understanding you look for really pays off to the reader. So, story-wise, do you have like a complete arc for the Dream Nebula planned out? You said you have stuff coming down the road about the nature of it. Do you have a complete conflict planned out between Zhao and Winston, or are you just...
I have scenes in my head. Think of it this way. It's like unrolling a big map of the United States and saying, I'm going to go from Boston to San Diego, and I'm going to make stops in Pittsburgh, Nashville, Superior, Kansas City, Dallas, and Salt Lake City. And those are like the scenes that I have roughed out in my head to a certain degree. How I get to there, I leave up to kind of the characters, and to use, and you'll just, as you've discovered probably in seeing me in other podcasts, I reference a lot of movie kind of thing to explain my thinking. It's very much like Dickens and The Man Who Invented Christmas, fighting with his characters. If you haven't seen it, it's a wonderful film that really speaks to me as a writer, in that I don't have all the routes in. I don't have the route planned. I just know I'm going to follow the signs and keep veering them back to this stop in Pittsburgh. But now that I get in Pittsburgh, how my trip from Boston to Pittsburgh took me, for all I know, I went down to Savannah, Georgia to get up to Pittsburgh. Now I bring all that baggage in from Savannah, and that will change the scene that I had in my head at Pittsburgh, and it could alter future stops on future scenes down the line. And I try to always make sure that what happened before gets carried over and is a logical extension beyond that. I may have, in the very end, it could be that there are such significant detours that I change my mind and I'm not going to San Diego anymore. I'm going to Seattle. And that literally happened with my first novel, in a way. I started writing it. I started writing in first person, realized it was the wrong thing because I was leaving so much detail out. So I had to move it to third person. Horrible experience to have to do that. Do not recommend. And when I finished writing it, I realized I had too much story. But I was trying to pack it in to 120,000 words, and it was not working. And I said, well, this is a natural breaking point. So I took sort of what was meant to be the second, it was meant to follow a different character. And so I split the book in half and said, all right, well, following this character will be the next book. So this will become a new book too. But then I went, oh crap, I just chopped 35% out of my novel and I have no ending. I have no serious ending. I need to do something. And what is it that, and I started going, oh my God, what do fantasy fans, what do they want? What do they always want? Okay, I got to have an epic battle. I got to have this confrontation between the good and the evil, and I got to have an epic battle. So I got to figure out a way to put that in there, but I can't screw up these small moments I had in there. And so I started writing, and that chopped out last 30%, suddenly became 45% of the book. So I had to rewrite the whole, almost the whole back half of my book. And I think I came up with a great job. It has a 4-chapter denouement, shall we say, but I am proud of the fact that in my epilogue, I literally turned the whole book on its head on the last sentence. Literally the last sentence. I had one of my friends, very close friend, he finished the book, called me immediately, quoted the last sentence at me, and said, "Are you kidding me?" So, spoiler alert, don't read the last sentence of A Light Rises in the Dark World ahead of everything else. It will wreck it for you.
Okay. Duly noted.
Warning given, anything else is your own fault.
Right. Yeah. So I always film, I call this table our table talk. I always film with my art table in the background. I see you've got a keyboard in your background there. How important is music to what you write? Do you do a lot of it? Do you listen to it?
I have a playlist full of music that I would love to figure out why SoundCloud won't let me make an account there and put songs on. So you want to know what I was listening to while I was writing this? Boom, there you go. Have fun. I also compose my own music that I get inspired by. Stuff, and so I will go ahead and flink around. And this is a great way for me to be creative. If my brain gets stuck on books, I often go to this, and that allows my brain to be creative, and sort of simmer on the problem in the back of my head while creating something new for this. And I've got maybe 14 total songs that I've created for Dream Nebula over this. Some are just repurposed from things I did earlier, but I was like, nope, that's really good. And I do hope to release them for sale, ultimately, with a couple freebies in there as well. But yeah, I like doing that. My influences are mostly either new age, synthwave, big band, and classical. Lots of classical and movie soundtracks.
Okay.
But my sound is sort of like John Carpenter meets Jan Hammer.
Interesting.
Comes from basically at one point having over 40 albums of Tangerine Dream, if you know that band.
I've heard of them. I'm not like deeply familiar with their music, but
they've got well over 100 albums out. And back during the 80s, I collected almost everything they had.
I know I've heard music by them because I've been listening to stuff, and I've been like, "What's that?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's Tangerine Dream." I'm like, "Okay," but I don't know if I could, pick it out of a a lineup.
Totally get that.
Anyway, do you have some you can share with the audience here?
Absolutely.
right. Very, very, very trippy, for lack of a
Oh
better
yeah,
term.
yeah. I had a lot of fun creating that. It was one of those things where I literally got I heard the riff, the da, 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 and then the melody came in. And I was like, oh god, I got something, because it was just sticking in my head. I would, when I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, I would actually end up just putting on in the background of what I was doing something else when I was working on one of the Dream Nebula novellas, and I'd let it run for 15 minutes before I was like, okay, I've been listening to this nonstop. I'm not tired of it. This has got to have something to it. So I expanded on it, and I found little touches here and there, percussion, and then I found the call and answer line harmony, and it just really became something fun.
Okay. So, what program
Mm-hmm.
do you work in?
I use Propellerhead Reason 12.
Okay.
It's a great mid-grade DAW, digital audio workstation, for those who don't know.
Okay.
I had fun picking up some extra virtual instruments and working with those. But generally speaking, I use it straight up. I do not use this as much as you'd think, except when I'm doing stuff that's very atmospheric or new age. I tend to then plink and plunk around trying to find the melody. Otherwise, if it's something more organized in my head, a lot more classical, then I'm just using the mouse and keyboard, laying in the notes and finding the harmonies.
Fair. Okay.
I also did a few signatures for characters. Of course, my favorite for me and my wife has turned out to be Holly's theme.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, so
Yes.
what can people expect from you next? You have 2 series ongoing. Do you have a new release in either one coming soon?
Well, not as soon as I'd like, but like I said, I've been sort of struggling to get big stuff out of my head. I've been noodling with the next trilogy of stories for Dream Nebula. I actually would want to turn my so when I went to a few gaming cons, I actually had a tabletop RPG game. I would like that I would run at that, and it was very well received. I would like to actually turn that into both a gaming resource book as well as a story. I actually would work really well if I could partner up with a comic book artist and turn it into graphic, a mini series of comics. But I also know that takes a lot of heavy lifting to do that kind of stuff. I see what's going on with a lot of indie comic creators, and I'm like, you guys are them's big boulders you're lifting.
Yeah. There's a lot of moving parts in that kind of thing. Especially since it's not the kind of thing that's very easy to put out with Amazon print on demand or something like that. So you gotta work out the printing and the warehousing and all that other fun stuff. So
yeah, I use Ingram Spark for printing my books and global distribution. So I don't even mess with that, and I format all my own ebooks. So I make sure that's taken care of the way I want it, because I do use embedded fonts, and unfortunately, Kindle won't allow you to use that. So, sorry, when you're using Kindle, you're going to get what Kindle wants you to see, not the way I fully intended it. So,
yeah,
I do my best.
Right.
But yeah, I also make sure that they are freeware. So, but the next project that I've promised, and I'm going to finish the 4th book, which is of Akinawazi Saga. That is going to be the culmination of a trilogy story plot, which I am currently using the working title, The Prodigals, plural, Return. So the prodigals are returning in that. I sort of have biblical themed titles for that, with A Light Rises in a Dark World, The Inheritance Thieves, and Into the High Places, and then The Prodigals Return. Is the intended conclusion of that story arc. It is not necessarily the end of the Akinawazi saga, but it will probably put it on rest until such time as I can return to the other character. My book 2, that was originally the back half of my book 1, is now my book 5.
Okay.
It got shoved, and it happened. Oh, funny story about this. It happened because I got yelled at by my aunt. My aunt bought my book, fell in love with what turned into my main character, Brother Finn, and she had me over for dinner one night and to sign her copy of the book. And she says, "So tell me, what happens with Brother Finn in the next book?" I'm like, "He's not in the next book. He focuses on Reimer." No, that is not what you're doing. You're going to tell me what happens to him. I said, "Oh, it's set like 3 years in the future." "Fine, tell me what happens to him in that time." And I sat there and said, "Well, I had an idea. I suppose I could do a book for those intervening 3 years." "Well, you better." Well, it turned into a trilogy. And it got a lot bigger. The first book in the Kinowazi saga focuses on a very small story that I jokingly called "Worst Trip to School Ever." Got to do it in comic book guy voice. It's very small in scale, but it's still a very, I personally think it's a very gripping tale. But the second, third, and now the fourth deals with the repercussions of what happened, because although it was a very small scale kind of thing, focusing on sort of the adventure, this short adventure with 2 main characters that I have in there. I have co-protagonists, Brother Finn, and then this boy, Reimar, as he's being taken to the Academy for the Hirja, which is the Old Norse for church, the church academy, to be brought up into the priesthood of the laity, however it shakes out. And Brother Finn is a disgraced monk going into exile because his enemies couldn't get him burned at the stake, couldn't get the support to do it. So he's getting exiled. Reimar's going to school, and the two are off together on that trip and the adventures that happen. But the events that happen during that trip spawn the trilogy that follows, and that follows a lot more closely the politics of the world. So you meet the Visakonge's family. The Visakonge is vice king, placed in power by the king of Denmark at the time, Sven Forkbeard, real king, because this is sort of alternate history, alternate geography. I set a few philosophical questions in place for the whole series, and that required me to do a fantasy version of North America. That magic is very real. It's basic, and all the supernatural stuff comes from either Native American myth, cryptids, and lumberjack lore, but everything supernaturally powered is based off of deliverance ministry, exorcism, and spiritual warfare. So it's a very interesting mix. And I was going somewhere with this, and my brain went away. As often it is. But yeah, it follows the politics of the political structures that maintain the Akinawazi Union, and the fact that the dynasty is failing, and it has a daring plan on basically making the Tronerving, or the crown prince, into a leader of men, and how things suddenly go horrifyingly wrong. And Brother Finn gets caught up in the whole mix of it, and just the adventure goes. And it at that point, it's a huge epic quest. At that time, the prince is trying to save his family's dynasty, and the Brother Finn has got to make some serious decisions, and the rebel jarls are trying to upset the apple cart and take over. And it's a story of corruption, backstabbing, politicking, and all the other good things we readers love to see our favorite characters put through. I've had 2 points in that series where I've been told by readers one of them nearly threw their Kindle across the room, and the other one did throw the book down because they got so mad at what I did. But they picked it up and kept reading.
It's nice to hear about those kind of reactions.
Yeah. I don't mean to. I didn't want to have what caused them to throw the book down to happen, but I said, no, that's got to happen. And boy, they are not going to be happy. Sure enough. Suddenly airborne books.
Right.
But so, yeah, that's the 4th series I hope to get, or the 4th book of the series, The Prodigals Return I hope to have out this year. It's sort of stuck right now at 35%, but I'm now reapplying a lot of force to crack that nut and move forward. Dream Nebula, I have the next trilogy starting to build in my head. This is where I've been spending a lot of exploratory writing, trying to feel out the world building, going, crap, I didn't world build enough. Oh, you asked earlier, sorry, looping back around. You asked earlier about the story arcs of Dream Nebula. Yes, I do have this major meta arc. The original structure of Dream Nebula was to be like a TV show. I originally was planning to write 22 short stories in a story arc and do 3 seasons of it for 66 short stories. That was the original idea. Well, I discovered very quickly I can't write a short story. I can write novellas. So I will probably cut down on the amount of novellas, but I'm still going to kind of treat it as a series. For all I know, it would be 10 novellas, or maybe it'll be 15. I don't know. It's sort of what the demands of the character are. That the 3 series are going to be titled, I believe the first one I have is Omnipresence, and then Omnipotence, and then Omniscience. So those would be the titles of the 3 seasons or 3 story arcs that are going to be put together that are going to follow Winston throughout this whole thing and slowly reveal the nature of the dream and Zhao and the future of Winston, as well as humanity as a whole. So,
okay.
And I had last year I went to Fantasy, which is a writers conference. It's David Weber's home conference, so to speak. And yeah, so he helped launch it with a few other authors, Mark Wandry and Chris. I can't remember his name. But anyway, another author in there has a whole bunch of science fiction out. And we went to that, and I got a chance to sit down with some developmental editors and just blast the bovine excrement, and realized that I had sort of given Zhao short shrift at the end and sort of left the reader kind of hanging. So I actually had to reconfigure what I thought the ending of the entire series was going to be. And I'm really happy with what came out of those conversations. So I'm kind of excited to get to the end. I wish I could hurry up and write them.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks for coming on, MD. We're glad to have you. And this all sounds really interesting. And, you know, as I get more reading time, I'm probably going to have to take a look at your fantasy stuff too, because if it's, if I find it as deep and interesting as your sci-fi, I'll probably enjoy it a lot.
Well, I'll tell you that my wife has said that the Kinawazi Saga books are a lot deeper than the other one, because I deal with a lot of theological and faith issues as well in there. I wrote it originally to be dark epic Christian fantasy. And the original questions that I had for myself was set out was, how can you write, okay, so normally in fantasy, you see an allegory for Jesus and an allegory for God and whatever. I said, no, how would you write it if you actually wanted God and Christ in a literal form, not necessarily in the book, but the whole of Christianity as we know it, so to speak, but in a magical setting. And that's why everything supernatural is kind of, or at least spiritual, is based off of spiritual warfare and deliverance and gifts of the spirit and things like that. I figured out a way to pull it off, and it works really well for what it is. And then, of course, I said, well, if I'm writing fantasy, I'm writing things I like. So I got Vikings and steamboats and Native American myth and all this stuff in there, because I'm from Wisconsin, so I'm steeped in Great Lakes history and lore. So I used a lot of that as an inspiration for it. But anyway, sorry, I digress. I didn't mean to cut off kind of filling out the ending here.
That's all right. That's all right. Anyways, I appreciated hearing about it. Hopefully the audience does too. We'll have to have you on again, maybe later in the year when you're getting ready to do another release.
Absolutely. I'd love to come back.
Anyway, great talk. I'm going to put all the notes for you down in the description. And of course, people can also find all my social media, my blog there, and they can let us know what they thought down in the comments. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. People can use those as they see fit, and I'll talk to you later.